Hello everyone. Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Please, before we start, especially with this guest today, let me know if you can hear me. And I will wait a little bit because I know there is some delay. So just let me know. No one is participating. Okay, so maybe we will just talk, Alex. Yes, thank you so much, Lars. God bless. Thank you so much. 1 year is good enough for me. Okay, today I am really, really grateful. And you don't understand what we went through with Mr. Alex KRAINER, because we had a live stream exactly when the situation was escalating, well, kind of ending in a way in Syria. And I don't believe it was just a technical issue from StreamYard, because all of a sudden the same issue was in this very exact day all over the place. So then we recorded an interview for an hour, and I think I had pretty good questions. I'm not going to ask the same questions today because that would be ridiculous. And it's actually so much has changed since then. So I really hope today you will hear us well, because I am very, very grateful that Alex found time again to join me on my channel and yeah, to connect for the first time. So thank you so much for joining me. I don't think you really need introduction, especially now when you're all over the place, very busy. But would you say nowadays, are you more political commentator than into the trending of following trends in the financial aspects? Which one is the most important now?
Definitely, I think that the trajectory towards World War III has overshadowed everything. And I mean, my website, my original Substack, my YouTube channel, everything was, I set up everything about 3 years ago, more or less, as a market commentary. It's called Trend Compass because I was going to talk about trends in financial and commodities markets. And my YouTube channel is called Markets, Trends, and Profits because I was going to talk about trading the markets and managing portfolios and managing risk and these things, things that are my my kind of results of my day job. But then all of this stuff started happening in Ukraine, in the Middle East, all over the place, South Korea, Georgia, France, Germany, UK, everywhere, like the world's coming apart at the seams. And it seems that part of the Western political establishment is absolutely desperate to push us into World War III. And, from that perspective, everything else we are doing won't matter much if we all end up incinerated in a nuclear holocaust. What does it matter if you managed your portfolio better or not so well, made money, lost money, got gold or Bitcoin, or doesn't matter. And my first adventure into this speaking out on the subject of geopolitics was in 2017. I published a book called The Grand Deception. And the reason why I published that book is because I knew something about certain things that were going on in Russia. And I'll just make the story very, very short. But basically, the protagonist of the story wrote a book called Red Notice. His name is Bill Browder. And when I read that book, I realized A, that he was lying. B, he lobbied he lobbied through U.S. Congress the so-called Magnitsky Act in 2012, and Magnitsky Act is deemed to be the opening salvo of the new Cold War. And I realized that the people behind this man, there was like a power network behind this man, and it's based in London, were desperately pushing the world towards World War III with Russia. And so same sentiment, same inclination led me to publish that book, because I realized that these people need to be unmasked, they need to be exposed. And I didn't think my career as a hedge fund manager mattered very much, because, again, what does it all matter if we end up incinerated, or if our kids end up being cannon fodder in World War III? And that kind of annoyed my investors and my bosses. So eventually I ended up sacked, not because of that book, but that book was let's say a big minus in my standing in the industry. But right now, world is in balance to the extent that you cannot ignore things that are going on at the political in the political sphere and in geopolitics, because it's going to affect us all. What is happening in Ukraine, when you understand the gestation of the Ukrainian crisis, how it started and where it ended up, you realize that the same exact process has been planned for other European countries as well. Maybe Romania is first in line, but the people in power will not stop unless we stop them. And in order for us to stop them, we have to understand what their agenda is and who they are and where they are. And so we have to dedicate a good bit of our energy and attention to this, because otherwise we just walk blind into a slaughterhouse, unaware, until it's too late.
So I will start with this, because this is exactly how I look at it, as you just described it in such a good way. It's almost, in a way, I don't know if it's not humorous, but when you see all those people who are trying to profit now, which I understand, because this is the human nature, and the most money you make during the war times, right? But like you're saying, is going to affect everyone if this escalates. And just before we connected, a few hours ago, I came across the video that is from the meeting of the top defense minister officers of the Russian Federation. And the Minister of the Defense of Russian Federation, Andrei Belousov, said exactly this. I will be quoting. American missiles are now confirmed to be placed in Europe, with the flight times to Moscow about 8 minutes. United States base was created 165 kilometers from our border in Poland. Side note from me, everyone knows this is the Redzikowo base, which is very close to the Baltic coast, north of Poland. NATO countries are now adopting a new combat system, which includes the deployment of 100,000 people in 10 days and 800,000 troops in several months. Meanwhile, well, this is not from him, end of quote. Meanwhile, Russia is advancing on the front in Ukraine on average of 30 square kilometers per day. So, Alex, I want to ask you here this. We will go to Syria, because I really want you to explain to us how those two conflicts are created. And I have really in-depth question about Syria specifically today, a little bit different approach than what you were expressing lately. But this particular meeting, it really shows me that I don't know if anything can stop this at this point. What do you think?
You mean the conflict between Russia and the West?
Yeah.
I think that the change of government in the United States can stop it. So this is why it remains to be seen whether there will be a change in government in the United States. It's possible. It's possible. I know that it's, you know, we're not looking at just Donald Trump. There's an array of power behind him who is trying to make sure that there is a transition of power. But it's not a given that they will succeed. You know, many people expect that there will be further attempts at his life, that the current government might try to contrive some kind of a crisis. Who knows, you know, alien attack, false flag, nuclear attack, some medical device using nuclear material has gone missing in transit in the United States, which I suppose could theoretically be used to create a dirty bomb. You know, Western intelligence agencies have collected enough fragments of Russian missiles in Ukraine that they could have, you know, brought them to the UK or to the United States, and they could blow them up over wherever, Washington, D.C., London, New York, wherever, and then say like, it's the Russians who hit us, and look, there's all this evidence, the fragments of Russian missiles, there's no question about it. And so I think anything is possible. And then, you know, I just recently read that there was a conversation between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris where he told her, hey, you know, you're not going anywhere, implying that you're going to stay in the White House, as though there is some kind of a contingency plan that they're not planning to hand over power on 20th January. Okay. It could be avoided if there's a change of power in Washington, D.C. If not, then, you know, you asked me, how is the conflict in Ukraine the same conflict as the one in the Middle East? And in order to do this, in order to answer that question, I'm going to have to abuse of your patience and that of your viewers, because I have to start from the beginning. First of all, I think that to understand the conflict, we have to take the largest possible context in which it is being fought. And you know, for that, I always bring up George Soros and his May 2021 speech at Davos to the World Economic Forum crowd, in which he said that what we are experiencing in the world today is a clash between two systems of governance. And this is the thesis that's being parroted by other people in the U.S. administration and the Pentagon and NATO. And basically, you know, George Soros says it's the clash between open societies and closed societies. Others say that it's a clash between democracies and autocracies, and you know, it's essentially the same thing that they're talking about. But they're being a little bit disingenuous, because they make it sound like we're the good guys, and you know, the dictators and autocrats of this world are the bad guys, and then, you know, like, if we destroy them all, then everyone will be happy. Basically, the conflict is between the Western oligarchic colonialist imperial system of governance versus everybody else. And by everybody else, I mean other democracies around the world, dictatorships, populations, including the populations in the West, the American people, the British people, the European people. Everybody is the victim of this system of governance, because what does it do? It turns all the resources into financial flows, and it engineers the whole society so that it looks like a giant conveyor belt that transfers wealth from where it's created to the banking oligarchy in London, Frankfurt, New York, Tokyo, and so forth, but primarily London, mainly and primarily London. Okay, so I wanted to make sure
Alex,
that
can I?
Yes.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. I try not to interrupt my guests, but sometimes I feel like it's the right moment. Let me ask you this here, City of London, and as you mentioned, how about the Vatican? As we look at this triangle of, there is a military power, so we're looking Washington, we're looking financial. This is symbolic, I know, because it's actually pretty, it changes, let's put it this way. So we have financial, spiritual, and military. We have Washington, DC, we have City of London, and we have Vatican. However, Vatican has a lot to do with finances as well, doesn't it?
It does.
So how is Vatican connected with that?
I'm not sure exactly, but I suspect that the connections are a lot more than what we know. And I have, I have it on my to-do list to delve into this problem matter and to research it further. But let me just give you a very, very vague, broad brush impression that I have from reading history. And my impression is that the Vatican, I'm a Catholic, just, so for full disclosure, I'm not criticizing Catholicism as an outsider. I am a Catholic. It seems to me that the Vatican is institutionalized continuity of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, contrary to what we have learned in History 101, was exactly the oligarchic, colonialist, imperialist system of governance that destroyed practically all the colonies it touched, enslaved its peoples, and ultimately destroyed itself. And it seems to me that, somehow the system of governance that emerged in the West now actually has certain links to the Catholic Church, because it kind of takes off, after centuries of dark ages in Europe. And by the dark ages, I mean, we just kind of lost history for a few centuries, because the Western Roman Empire collapsed, and it almost went back to, not exactly Stone Age, but it went back to native living for some times. And then it started to, things started moving again with the Crusades. And the Crusaders went to ostensibly to liberate the Holy Land, but I think that the main project was sacking Constantinople, because it was extraordinarily wealthy with gold and silver. And then this loot of gold and silver was brought back to Europe and provided the collateral to restart the European economy, to start credit creation again. And so some of these crusaders settled the Venetian lagoon and built up Venice, and Venice was a continuation of this oligarchic.
It's a certain bloodline that just survive and continue.
It's apparently, yeah, it's apparently certain bloodlines, but even if there's some turnover in the bloodlines, the system of governance kind of takes off from there and then evolves and gains power, and it becomes this parasite that is with humanity still, and that has turned us into what we are today, not as individuals but as a collective, as a society. And the Western civil. Okay, so just to finish the history in very broad brush from the Roman Empire to today. So then Venetians created what is perhaps the first national bank, and then I don't know if it was called Banca di Rialto or something like this, but it was the first version of a central bank, let's call it. And then they moved, the Venetian bankers moved to Amsterdam, and they created the Bank of Amsterdam and Amsterdam.
This is with the tulips, right? With the tulips in that era.
Yeah, that's where also the boom bust cycles begin, and the asset bubbles. And back then, it wasn't AI, it was tulip bulbs, but it got insane proportions. So we had the first recorded asset bubble in history, but then there were many asset bubbles after that. The South Seas bubble and the Mississippi bubble and all kinds of stuff like that. And then the Dutch Empire emanated from that. But the Dutch Empire was headquartered in Amsterdam. It's on a plain, so it's easy to invade and easily drawn into warfare and weakened in this way. So in 1688 they arranged to regime change England, and William of Orange from Amsterdam took over power in England. And they took over the city of London, which is its own political entity. And then the parasite dug itself into the city of London, and it's been there ever since. And in the centuries that ensued, European powers eradicated 6 major indigenous civilizations around the world: the Mayas, the Incas, the Aztecas, India, Japan, and China. And they also destroyed thousands of smaller cultures and kingdoms and tribes everywhere around the world. And we depopulated very, very large swathes of the world and completely destroyed indigenous populations in certain places like the Caribbean. Caribbean used to be populated by native tribes there that were more similar to, let's say, what we call American Indians today than to Black Africans that are populating the Caribbean islands today. And the reason why that is so is because the indigenous populations there didn't care much to become slave to European colonialists, so they all got slaughtered and replaced by slaves brought from Africa. So, if you look at a place like Haiti today, it's all Black people of African descent, whereas before European colonialism, it was indigenous people that might have looked more like the Mayas and the Aztecas. Anyway,
with the ancient knowledge that doesn't require any monetary stuff.
Well, yeah, and some civilizations around the world never used any money, like Egypt. Egypt was not backwards. They built the pyramids. We still don't know how the hell they did it, but they did it somehow. And they apparently had very, very advanced knowledge and advanced technologies. And they had a continuity of 3,000 years, but never used money. So it's obvious that you can organize society in different ways. But this knowledge is being systematically purged from our culture, so that we only think that the only possible way to organize a society is the way we are. And if somebody doesn't agree, then we are entitled to force it on them. Anyway, I didn't want to get lost in that story, because your question was, why is the conflict in Ukraine the same thing as the conflict in the Middle East? Okay.
Yes.
So, okay. Now I try to understand that the conflict is between one system of governance, think London, Wall Street, Bank of International Settlement, Davos, World Economic Forum, that group of vested interests, let's say. And the other side is everybody else, Cuba, Russia, China, Iran, the French people, the American people, the Swiss people, you name it, everybody else. And so for this Western Empire, which, I think it originates with the British Empire, the geopolitical imperative is to maintain hegemony over the Eurasian landmass, for the reason that Eurasian landmass is 7/8 of the global population. It's between 70 and 80% of the world's GDP, maybe closer to 80%. It's about 70% of world's energy reserves, rare earth minerals, all kinds of other resources. So it's about resources and wealth. And I'll also try to explain why resources matter in that sense. And so it's a vast geographical expanse. It's massive continent, and one little Britain or even little United States cannot possibly hope to control this by policing it militarily. You cannot send enough troops all over the Eurasian landmass to control it in this way. So the way the British sought to control Eurasian landmass is by seeding it with all these crisis flashpoint, where they can pit one political entity against the other, get them to go to war. So they're always on the verge of destabilization. They're always weak. They're always close to broke.
Divide and conquer.
Exactly, divide and conquer. And this was even formalized in studies by Halford Mackinder. I think that by now a lot of people are familiar with that. But Halford Mackinder basically formulated the thesis of a historical pivot of the world, and he hypothesized that Britain being Britain being the maritime power was vulnerable to a future emergence of a land power, which would be a lot more powerful and could displace the British Empire as the greatest power in the world. And so geographically, he said that this was in the so-called pivot area, which was later he changed the name to Heartland. So if you look up the historical pivot of the world or Heartland theory, you'll find all this. This was the expanse of space, let's say, between Ukraine and Afghanistan, encompassing Russia, Iran, the Caucasus, and chunks of Pakistan to chunks of Afghanistan towards Pakistan, and then up to the north all the way to across Siberia. And they believed that the most likely power that was going to emerge as a land empire in the future was going to be Russia. And Mackinder first wrote about this in 1904, which was the same year when the Russians introduced the Trans-Siberian Railway. And this was seen as the event that could galvanize the development of this land empire, because it would improve transport and communications and lead to more robust economic development. And so Mackinder proposed what to do in order to prevent this land-based empire from emerging, this pivot power. And so his proposal was that they surround this pivot power with an arc of crises, so that they could draw Russia into these never-ending quagmires in various theaters. So at that time, Mackinder was talking about France, Italy, Egypt, India, and Korea. But by today, we've also had the creation of, the political situations have changed. You have creation of Israel, independent Ukraine, Ottoman Empire is no longer, so there are all these other countries in the Middle East. India has been divided between India and Pakistan. Pakistan might end up divided between North Pakistan and Balochistan. Korea has been divided into North and South Korea, and so on. And so all of these and more flashpoints give the empire possibility of detonating a military conflict that then draws the pivot power, i.e. Russia, into these never-ending wars, so that it can never fully develop economically, and it's always weakened, and it always needs to depend on Western powers for, weapons and financing and loans and aid and who knows what. That was the idea. And so this is what we've actually seen through history, because they even brought down the Soviet Union by drawing it into a quagmire in Afghanistan. And it wasn't necessarily only targeted at Russia. This same basic approach to governing the Eurasian landmass was also used against China, against Iran. They got their CIA recruit Saddam Hussein to launch a war against Iran, and then had this devastating war for 8 years between Iran and Iraq. They also made sure that Saudi Arabia and Iran were on hostile terms. They arranged that China and India were on hostile terms, and so forth. So anyway, if you look at the map of the Eurasian landmass, you see that all these crisis flashpoints are practically lined around the southern underbelly, underneath this pivot area. And so, we saw Soviet Union destroyed in the quagmire in Afghanistan. We saw that in the 1990s, they, the CIA orchestrated a jihadi separatist war against Russia in Chechnya and in Dagestan. Now we have a proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. And now we also have this war in the Middle East, because Syria has been one of the, let's say, one of the pivots of stability for Russia in the Middle East, an ally, in the Middle East. Okay, so in this sense, the war in Ukraine has been just gestating since 1991. Since that time, NATO already initiated collaboration with Ukraine. In 1997, they formalized it. They signed something called the Agreement on Distinctive Partnership. This document was signed in 1997 in Madrid at a NATO summit. And since then, NATO has had this growing collaboration with Ukraine, and they started training up the Ukrainians and pretty much turning Ukraine into a bludgeon to use eventually against Russia, to weaken it, to regime change it, to partition it, and make sure that an alternative to the Western Empire doesn't emerge. I guarantee you that if they somehow managed, or in the future managed, to regime change Russia, they will do exactly the same against China. They will turn Russia into a bludgeon to use against China. And that way, you know, they eliminate any power that is capable to say no to the Western diktat, i.e. to the diktat of this Western oligarchic, colonialist, imperialistic system of governance that says, give us your resources and give us your population, because we can't dig up and extract all those resources ourselves. We need cheap labor power. And so this is what the Western system of governance does and has done for centuries all around the world. And this is how it has destroyed all these populations and how it has destroyed 6 major indigenous civilizations around the world, and probably hundreds of millions of people everywhere. So anyway, that long story, and I told you I was going to try your patience, is the answer to the question, how is the Middle East the same conflict as Ukraine?
I really appreciate this, Alex. I know the audience too. And I want to ask you now this. In the last interview that we had that was soundless, however, Alex answered this question on many other channels. It was particularly about situation in Syria. So I want to go into Syria for a moment and ask you your thoughts on this. I came across a video from Solari report, which is with Catherine Austin Fitz. And in that video was mentioned a recording, was actually shown a recording from 2001 with General, if I jinx the name, apologies,
Wesley Clark.
Wesley Clark, correct? Who gave an interview, I think it was Democracy Now, and I will be quoting what he said. He was describing a moment in which he had an interaction with another general, and that general had a certain document. So he asked Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark, asked that other general, are we still going to war with Iraq? This is after 9/11 situation. And that other general with the document said, oh, it's worse than that. I just got this document from the Secretary of Defense office today. It's a memo that describes how we will take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq, then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off with Iran. So during this video on Solari Report, Catherine Austin Fitz and that other gentleman who was hosting that, she suggested that there was a deal made between Russia and the West before any move to Syria. And that, let's say, West will say, you take the Ukraine, but we will do whatever we want to do with Syria. Before I will ask you here, but I also want to bring this up because Assad, again, I am not an expert in anything to do with Syria at all. I am just observing. Maybe it's actually better because I don't have any, it's not emotional and it's not loaded with assumptions. So it's like very fresh look on it. And he's spoken up, you know, he's in Moscow now. Apparently he has like 20 apartments there, and his son finished I think he already graduated the university in Moscow. And he said, let me actually tell you exactly what he said. He said that that actually Moscow was requesting him to leave Syria and to seek the shelter in Moscow. So that kind of throw a little bit different light on what we have discussed the last time. Because now, I will just rewind a little. We were talking in our previous interview about Syria being a trap created, let's say, in general, by the East to get the West into this trap. Just very, very simplifying this. But now I'm thinking, what if it is a trap, but it's a different kind of trap? What if that actually there could be a deal? And here is the question. If Russia stands behind Iran, as I know because I have been following this and looking at those informations and news, and the support that Russia declares for Iran constantly is still going to be there, then that plan to have those 7 countries, because now we only have 1 left to go, Alex, so we have 6. I really would like to know your thoughts on this. What do you think? I know this is really very loaded, but what do you think is taking place with this?
I think it is extremely unlikely that there was a deal between Russia and the West. I think the chances of that are 0.00 nothing. And I'll try to explain why. The West has already been strategically defeated in the Middle East. Western powers, neither the United States nor NATO, simply do not have the resources to reassert their hegemony over the Middle East. So militarily, the source of power of the United States over any area in the world were their carrier strike groups. Okay, so aircraft carriers and the supporting fleet with their aircraft and missiles who could go anywhere in the world and wreak havoc on any country. You know, as they like to say, bomb them into the Middle Age, back into the Stone Age. This exact phrase has been uttered by various American leaders and military commanders many times as a threat to many leaders in other nations. So this was, from the military standpoint, this was the enforcement arm. And then the other lever of power that the United States had in the Middle East was their alliances. So the United States had an alliance with Egypt, with Jordan, with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, and with the Gulf states, other than Iran, and let's say a wobbly alliance with Oman. And so you can already go back to the documents that the Pentagon published in the early 90s, 1991, where they already understood they had very uncertain means of maintaining their dominance, because they said all we have there are our alliances and power projection, meaning, keeping everybody intimidated with the idea that we can easily destroy you, so that don't even think about saying no to us and defying our orders. Well, the invention of precision hypersonic missiles immediately nullifies aircraft carrier strike groups as a means of power projection, because they can be sunk easily by something like the Russian Kinjal missile. Its first use in warfare has shown the Western powers what the Russians can do. And you know, the first place where they launched a Kinjal missile was a Ukrainian military facility. I think it was a storage built by the Soviet, and it was designed to withstand a nuclear explosion. So it was 150 meters underground, and I think it had 7 or 8 layers of concrete shield, like a concrete roof, in 7 or 8 layers in this 150 meters underground. And this single Kinjal landed there and broke through all of it and destroyed the storage facility. And so if it can do that, it can cut an aircraft carrier in half, like a hot knife through butter. And we know that today the Iranians have precision hypersonic missiles, and the Houthis in Yemen have them also, because I think it was in April this year or something it was earlier this year. The Houthis launched a missile on Tel Aviv, which traveled, I think, about 2,100 kilometers in 11 minutes. And it landed without a warhead. They didn't even put a warhead on it. It was only meant to be a message. But the message was, we can hit you at any time with precision, and there's nothing you can do about it, because this missile flew over, you know, these Western ships that are, you know, still running the Prosperity Guardian operation in the Red Sea, and over Israeli air defense systems, and none of them even saw the missile coming. So this is strategic defeat, because even today, the Americans have to keep their aircraft carrier groups outside of the range of Iranian and Houthi missiles, which means that they can no longer come to the aid of their allies, not even Israel. And so why would you allow them back into the Middle East to reassert their hegemony, using Israel as their proxy, and these Ansar Allah, not Ansar Allah, but HTS jihadis? This is a band of mutually hostile brigades of jihadis, 30,000 of them, that were led into Syria. Syria is a very large country, and these jihadis came in on pickup trucks, armed mainly with light weaponry. They have not a snowball's chance in hell of being able to assert control over Syria. It's just not going to happen. Israel, I think, got drawn into a trap. They will probably end up overextending themselves. And so the idea that the Russians gave this gift to the United States, to the Biden administration, keep in mind, you know, because in only 35 days, there should be another administration there. So who would they even make that deal with? And they know that it's not a certainty that Trump was even going to become president, because we don't know that yet. So I think that the idea that this was some kind of a deal between the Russians and Americans, it just doesn't strategically makes no sense whatsoever. It would be like saying, like, I'm just going to poke myself in the eye because, you know, why not? I'll give somebody else the advantage of having 2 eyes while I have only one. I don't know how to describe.
That's actually good that there was no deal, in my opinion.
No, I think, look, I think this is good. It's only terrible for the people living in Syria right now, because the Israelis now, in their frenzy to pacify the largest possible buffer zone around Israel, and to maybe pave the way for the greater Israel, they're trying to turn everything into rubble. It's always the same thing. That Tacitus quoted some barbarian king at the time who said, you create a desolation and call it peace. This is what Israel is doing today. But they're not doing this because they're comfortable and at ease. They're doing it because they're in a panic, and they realize that these jihadis took over Syria. They were not meant to, because you had 30,000 jihadis going against Syrian army of 270,000, better armed, better equipped, dug in defensive positions. Israeli intelligence themselves thought that the whole thing was a suicide mission. What was meant to happen was that they mutually bled each other white so that Syria would be weakened, so that somehow they could try to regime change Syria. They never thought that the jihadis would take over in the space of 11 days, get into Damascus, and then possibly become a threat on the border of Israel. And so this is why they launched into this bombing frenzy everywhere, because they wanted to destroy all of Syria's military and transport infrastructure and arsenals of weapons, to make sure that it doesn't fall into the hand of these jihadi groups. It's a panic. It's not, a victory parade. And I think that we will know when the dust settles, and it'll take a while, but it seems to me that maybe Syria was becoming unmanageable, or too vulnerable to destabilization and attack. And I think that maybe at some point, at some level, decision was made to sacrifice it, and that the political power vacuum that is created over Syria will maybe be filled by Iran and Turkey. So maybe, with the long view of history, they thought, if we have two major powers there in the region who can become guarantors of peace, then it can be Iran and Turkey. Because the Chinese have already designated Iran as the, let's say, anchor of the new security architecture in the Middle East. And maybe the West, the far end of West Asia, the Mediterranean coast, maybe will become a Turkish dominated area. I don't know. Maybe that'll turn out to make better sense than what we have now. But what that means is that Israel has to go. Israel is finished, and there's no future for it in this new security architecture, because Israel was created exactly for this reason, to be a crisis flashpoint and to be the element of destabilization of the region. And it has fulfilled this role perfectly. It has been at war with somebody in the neighborhood all the time, and it has been the destabilizing influence on the whole region. And the whole purpose of that is so that the Western financiers could control the region's resources and turn it into their own collateral, and then float up their whole financial system on the basis of issuing bank loans on the basis of that collateral. But the only way you can do that is if you control the collateral by force.
Thank you. And I was thinking when you were saying all of this, Alex, with all the respect to all those experts and people with so much experience, because that lady has a lot experience, especially in the monetary financial arena, right? Catherine Austin Fitts. But what I really think is they really don't know Russia. They really don't understand how Russia fully operates. I think the way of perceiving the scenarios, assumption of those scenarios, is from the Western standpoint. And maybe that's why they still believe that this plan is still is not expired. that this country number 7 is still on the list, which in this case, this plan is not going to be fulfilled.
The plan didn't work the way it was expressed. Those 7 countries were supposed to fall in 5 years. It's been now, what, about 20, a little bit more than 20. And many things have happened in those 20 years. You know, when they formulated that plan, there wasn't any hypersonic missiles. Russia was weak. China was a lot weaker than it is now. There was no alliance between Russia and Iran. In fact, Russia and Iran had a hostile mutual relationship back then. Iran was still on hostile terms with Saudi Arabia. Many things changed. And then, you know, the empire, every time they scored one of these Pyrrhic victories, they became much weaker than they were before. So when they formulated that plan, it was their unipolar moment when they felt invincible and bulletproof. Russia was
after 9/11, especially after 9/11.
Yes. And you know, at that point, Russia was almost a non-entity. It was on the verge of collapsing. It was almost a failed state. It was one of the most dysfunctional, poorest, most corrupt countries in the world. 1990, at the end of 1999 was when Vladimir Putin came to power. It was after 10 years of rule of Boris Yeltsin. The country was practically eviscerated, and it was mired in this quagmire in Chechnya that seemed to be going nowhere. So the Western establishment felt invincible. So they were trying to, they were formulating this very, very ambitious plan, but, look at what happened. Meanwhile, they got defeated by the Taliban in Afghanistan. They cannot overcome the Houthis in Yemen, in spite of trying everything for the last 18 months with their, Operation Prosperity Guardian. They took all the assets of, like the best assets of the United States and Britain and Italy, and I don't know what other navies there, but they can't stop the missiles from Yemen, and they cannot stop Yemenis from sinking their ships in the Red Sea. And the alliance with Saudi Arabia was much, much more solid. It is not anymore. So much change. So, just to go back to that list and to say like, oh my God, look, they already took down 6 countries and there's only 1 left. They have no way to defeat Iran. They have absolutely no way to defeat Iran. The only thing they can do is to lob nuclear weapons at Iran and try to destroy it. But, that's not going to do it. They might blow things up, but they cannot assert control over Iran. They're hoping to regime change it and install some kind of a Zelensky or some kind of Al-Golani in Iran, but that's a long shot. Iran is well prepared for that. They had 30 years to prepare for this conflict. They have consolidated their political ruling establishment. They have the backing of Russia and they have the backing of China. I just don't see that, that magical list is now somehow lending itself to the conclusion that the West is unstoppable and invincible and it's going to have its way anyway. It's just not the fact.
Thank you so much. That is a very good news here. But I know you're very tired and we connected so late. So please be honest with me. I have one more question. Do you prefer to answer it next time, or you have enough energy to answer it now?
No, I can do another question.
Okay. So since this is your area of expertise, and I'm absolutely not an expert in this, all I know about the IMF is me being not professional and paraphrasing this. When they go to the countries, they create the loans, the country puts themselves in a big doo-doo because they own a lot of money and the bank controls them. This is how I understand this. Create the chaos, destroy the country, and then offer them out of your heart this beautiful support that will be the highest interest rates for generations to come, and the country is finished as far as economically for a long time. I really want to know what is the relationship between the IMF and Russia, Alex. And, you know, I've been to Russia quite a few times, and I love the country. I haven't seen the entire country, which I think is even impossible. But I always have this little percentage of in my mind of questioning things, how those things operate. So how Russia is really free from this global system, from those bankers, from all of this. Is Russia really free completely, or there is still some connection and they have some saying, some leverage, some influence on Russia?
I think that domestically Russia has largely freed itself of the IMF and and the World Bank, and I think pretty much all other Western financial institutions. But having said that, Russia is still not free of the IMF, and I'll explain the reason why. Because most of the countries of the global South are under the diktat of the IMF in one way or another. And I think that pretty much all of the BRICS nations are too. And so, you know, Russia cannot, you know, attempts to, let's say, take on the IMF and fight against them could blow back in the sense of causing trouble for their other BRICS partners. Or, you know, the IMF could make it very difficult for Russia's other BRICS partners to cooperate and do deals with other BRICS nations, with Russia and so forth. So, you know, the Russians never go head to head against these institutions. They always try to find a workaround, and they try to find ways of cooperation and pressure points where they can exert their own influence to, you know, to come closer to their objectives without causing too much disruption. Russia still depends on, you know, they've been sanctioned by Western nations, so, you know, they have to keep good trade relationships with other nations. And so we've seen over the last 3 years that Russians have gone out of their way to cultivate good trade relations with countries like China and India and South American countries. But all of these countries are, you know, have some kind of an arrangement with the IMF. And so you can't eliminate it. And you also can't eliminate the dollar, because all of these nations also depend on dollar trade. So I think that the Russians are taking a very long view of history. I think that they're preparing terrain for changes and building new foundations for the future of the world, you know, new trade settlement currencies and new reserve currencies. But they're not, you know, being aggressive in the sense of destroying the currently existing arrangements. I think they're just trying to find ways to influence the system to, you know, to the best benefit of everybody without causing adverse effects to others. And I think that, you know, I understood something about the way Russians manage these things through the COVID pandemics. And many people will remember that Russia was fully on board with all these World Health Organization measures. And many people took that as proof that Russia is in cahoots with World Health Organization and World Economic Forum, and that they're all, one big club, and that they're just deceiving us, that this is that they're control opposition, essentially. But what the Russians actually did is that they went along with the whole thing completely like they believed it. And I suspect that they didn't really believe it because Alexander Lukashenko didn't believe it. And they have very close intelligence contacts and share understanding and information. So whatever Lukashenko knew, the Russians knew, and vice versa. Nevertheless, they completely went along with the agenda. And then we found out why when they were the first country out with a vaccine. And why is this important? Because the pandemic and the vaccines were secondary considerations. The most important thing is that these Western owned and Western controlled pharmaceutical companies were meant to have a monopoly on these mRNA vaccines, the COVID vaccines, right? And you'll remember maybe that they were talking about we're never going back to the old normal until 7 billion people in the world have been vaccinated. And that didn't mean Russian vaccine, Chinese vaccine, any old vaccines. They meant their own, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, San Pasteur, whatever they had. It was meant to be with their vaccine. Let me explain why this is important. Because the plan with those vaccines was that we were supposed to obtain vaccine certificates. It was only with those vaccine certificates that we would be able to board planes and trains and go to theaters and restaurants and so forth. So they were preparing a system of permitting that depended on whether you were compliant with your vaccine schedule. And that means that they issued you some kind of a little barcode or a QR code, right? And then anywhere
under the skin, ultimately.
Ultimately, yes, exactly. Ultimately under the skin. But you see, the thing was that all of these QR codes would be issued on the basis of their vaccines. And then the permitting system would be managed by, it would be managed out of a certain European center where you'd have all these servers where, like when you get your thing beeped, then the information goes somewhere, and then the feedback comes stop or go, right? Green or red. So what they wanted to achieve is to have control over every single individual in the world and to condition that control on being compliant with their vaccines, right? And so now that, when Russians came out with their Sputnik V vaccine, and they weren't only offering it to Russian people, they said immediately, we offer this to any country in the world. And if you want to produce your own, we give you a license and you can produce it in your own country. And so now what this means is that either you have to let Russians into the administration of this permitting system, this matrix that they were planning for us, or you have to give up control of every nation that used Sputnik V vaccine. And then the Chinese also came up with their own Sinovac, right? And so this is how the Russians practically blew up the whole pandemic agenda for the Western powers, not by confronting them and saying, oh no, this is a lie, this is bullshit, we're not going to go along with this. But by going along with this and then coming up with their own version, and they had to be taken seriously. Had they said like, no, vaccine, this COVID agenda is fake, this is not true, this is not the real thing, then nobody in the world would take Sputnik 5 seriously. It's by going along with the agenda with utter seriousness that you then gain credibility for your vaccine. And that then I think the Lancet or British Medical Journal, I don't know who, but when the vaccine came out, they had to say like, no, this is a completely valid vaccine and all is good. So it was accepted, so that in other countries people can say like, oh, okay, we have a vaccine, we have a solution, let's buy it from the Russians, or let's take their license and produce the same vaccine over here and use it. And another thing is when Biden became president, and this is when Zelensky immediately went from the guy who got elected on a peace platform to antagonizing Russia and provoking a conflict that happened almost exactly when Joe Biden came to power. One of the first things he did is he arrested Leonid Kravchuk in Russia. Is it Leonid? Anyway, Kravchuk, the Russian oligarch who was the most popular opposition politician in Ukraine at that time. And Kravchuk owned a pharmaceutical company in Ukraine.
Alex, can I just say, I just Googled him. He was the former president of Ukraine. Leonid Kravchuk.
No, it's not Kravchuk. It's was the guy that they had arrested in 2020 or 21.
He was in, I think Oliver Stone had an interview with him, right?
Yes, that one.
Okay, I will.
I am tired. Anyway, the guy was one of the wealthiest oligarchs in Ukraine. He was the most popular opposition leader at the time. He owned 3 opposition television networks, and he owned a pharmaceutical company. And that pharmaceutical company obtained a license. No, it wasn't Kolomoisky. No, it wasn't Kolomoisky. It was I should know this name. I don't know. This is now really annoying. Okay, I know.
I'm trying to find it, but I remember the face. I actually know who, but I don't know.
Yeah, and then there was also
Medvedchuk. No, Medvedchuk. I think that's the name. I think that's him. Yes. Thank you, Nicola.
Some kind of a chuk, but I got the wrong chuk. I got the Kravchuk instead of Medvedchuk. No, it was Medvedchuk. Yeah. And so Medvedchuk owned a pharmaceutical company which obtained the license from Russia to produce Sputnik 5 in Ukraine. And after Biden came to power, and 12 days after he came to the White House, he had a phone call with Zelensky. And then the very next day, Zelensky outlawed Medvedchuk's political party and shut down his 3 TV networks. And then I think in another 2 weeks, they arrested Medvedchuk, and they took over all of his, they seized all of his businesses and his assets. including the pharmaceutical company. And the first thing they did, they tore up the contract with the Russians for the Sputnik 5. And then, all of Ukraine went on Pfizer and Moderna. So, this wasn't.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that he actually was.
Yes.
Now this makes sense.
Anyway, the point I was making is the Russians try to work around these agendas and find a weak spot and find a way to, let's say, bring it down, but they don't go into a frontal attack if they can avoid it. And the different, the contrast was how Alexander Lukashenko handled it, the president of Belarus, and the Russians. Alexander Lukashenko just said, like, this is all bullshit, we're not doing this, and that's it. And then IMF tried to bribe him into doing it by offering him $940 million loan. And he turned down the loan. He said, like, no, I'm not doing this. You can keep your money. The Russians went along, and then they said, like, oh, this terrible disease, look, we invented a vaccine, and you all can have it if you like. And so the whole control matrix that was supposed to evolve from the management of these barcodes and vaccination certificates, and that was all meant to evolve into our bank accounts being linked to all this. We have Vladimir Putin to thank that this all collapsed and turned into nothing.
Thank you, Alex, for explaining this. I never really thought about it in this way, but I knew about what you're saying, but I didn't realize how much that Sputnik helped.
Yeah. And it also tells you how far the Russians think about these things and how well they are informed. And another confirmation about this I got because at some point while the pandemic was still lasting, I saw an interview on Russian television with a Russian military general. And at one point, the journalist asked him about the pandemic. Like, how are we doing with blah blah blah? I don't know what the question was exactly, but his answer was, "Oh no, like we do not treat this pandemic as an issue of public health. We treat it as a global geopolitical event." And I don't know, he probably wasn't meant to say that, but he, that was a very, very important revelation, that this is what the mindset and among the Russian leadership is, and they were absolutely right. But the point being is they saw it coming from many, many miles away, and already had contingency plans and already decided, what are we going to do about this? What's the best strategy to deal with this? So, when it comes to Syria, when it comes to dealing with the IMF, when it comes to dealing with the UN, World Economic Forum, and all of these structures in the West, don't expect obvious moves. Don't expect punches in the nose coming from the Russians. They always play the game according to a strategy that they determine is most advantageous to them. They always keep contact with these people. I'm certain that the day this new and improved al-Nusra front went into Damascus, the Russians were on the phone with them to say, okay, who are you? What do you want? Can we work together? They work very long term. They take a very long view of the game and of the strategy. And so all of these, how they handle all of these day-to-day events is not at all obvious. So I think it's best not to jump to conclusions too quickly.
Thank you, Alex, so much. And yeah, it's almost like an instant gratification that is definition now of the West. And then long-term thinking, that is the East. And even how they fight that battle, that war, is the same thing. It's not drop the bomb and finish it, but is long-term thinking and what you're accomplishing along the way and the process and this long time of doing this. I want to end this video with something and share my personal opinion on this because Alex is already so tired, so I don't want to keep my guest any much longer. There was a video circulating a while ago that was Klaus Schwab. We know who he is, famous reptile, who says that even Vladimir Putin is one of many world leaders that participated in the World Economic Forum Young Global Leader Program. And many people say, this is just my opinion, many people say Putin is one of them because he attended this program. And I truly, honestly, I feel the case was, let me go there and figure out what those schmucks are doing. So I have an idea and I come back and I share with my village. Because
oh no, obviously, yeah, because how are you going to know? You know, if you want to bring down a drug cartel, you send people as undercover cops to understand what's going on there, right? You don't start carpet bombing where you think they are. You have to learn who's who, right? And what their habits are and where they go and what they eat and who their girlfriends and children and cousins are. So, you know, that's what undercover cops do. And this is what Russians do with practically every institution in the world. Especially
imagine,
these
Alex, imagine who he saw there, like weak Trudeau's. I mean, no backbones. He saw people without any backbones, hardly any, maybe one brain cell, zero future thinking.
You're very generous.
Like, all right, that's what we are. It's like amoebas around the round table. We are dealing with those. He went back to Russia and he said, okay, this is the opposition. That's it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and you know, also, Anya, you can also see it in the way they handled the Ukraine war, because they didn't start with their special military operation immediately in 2014, even though everything started happening in 2014. It took them 8 years to make that decision, and in those 8 years, they tried everything else. They tried the Geneva talks. They tried the Minsk I agreement. They made Minsk II agreements. They've done everything possible to avoid going to war. And then, you know, they only went to war when everything else failed.
So, yeah, just weak. Unfortunately, people are dying, and that is not funny at all. Thank you everyone for watching today. I really appreciate. I know it's pretty late and my guest had time for us. So thank you. If you're watching, make sure to hit the like and share the video. The links to Alex KRAINER are down below the live stream. There is X, your account on X, and there are 2 other links to Substack and I think your main website, I believe. So I already attached it there. Anything else you want to add, Alex, before we end the live stream? Any message to the audience?
Well, from those links, people can find everything else they might want to be interested. But yeah, that's basically it. So thank you for having me, Anya.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to spend an hour and 20 minutes talking to you. It was enjoyable, and my warm greetings from Monaco to your viewers and listeners.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for watching, and until next time. Bye guys.
Bye.